Ready to open? Yep. Okay. That's us now.
Thank you, Clerk. Okay, good morning, members. To Fáilte Rómha Laois, we do have a quorum, and can I now call the meeting to order and welcome all of you to the 42nd meeting of the Committee for Communities on this beautiful morning. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can you also please remind members about protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with the proceedings, and be aware of the sensitivity of the microphones and cameras when using tablet devices. And I would also ask members to remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. So I will just declare that I'm a director of a charity and also own a property from which I derive a rental income. Any other declarations, Kelly?
A member of the deaf community.
Thank you, Kelly.
I'm just as correspondence, I'm a member of the TEO committee, the executive or committee for the executive office. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Andy?
Yeah, Chair, similar direct declarations to yourself, charity trustee and a private landlord.
Yep. Thank you for that. Okay, members, thanks for those all. So, Chair's business, then members, not very much this week. Just to advise that I have been invited to attend an event as committee chair in Queen's University on Wednesday 16th of March. The event is entitled Passing the Torch, and it's being hosted by Senator George Mitchell on Wednesday. The event is about exploring the power of community-driven activism as a positive force for change. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's something I'm very interested in. The other thing I did want to mention as well, I have mentioned previously, but I had met a couple of weeks ago, or visited a couple of weeks ago, the O'Fee Library in Armagh. It's a fantastic resource. There's some really interesting and unusual collections curated there. So I just wanted to suggest members maybe at a future date we could consider that either for a visit or potentially for a committee meeting at some time down the line if members were content we add it to the list of potential venues.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, members, then moving on to item 3, which is our draft minutes. Sorry, I had apologies there. Sorry, Clerk, I've missed apologies before Chair's business. Do we have any apologies
No
today?
apologies, yeah.
Members aware of any apologies? No, thank you. Okay, members, item 3 then is draft minutes. Can I refer you to the draft minutes from the meeting on 3rd of April, which are page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of the 3rd of April as drafted?
Right.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 4, matters arising then. So you've been provided, members, as usual, with a summary table of matters arising at page 17. I intend to go through these items by number and group and ask if you want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item there. So can I ask members if you have any comments on item 4.2 to 4.6? Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. 4.2, could we as a committee write to the Finance Minister to ask what work is being done to address the Fiscal Council's observations on income fees and charges and how transparency is being considered for improvement? Because it's just that's what the Fiscal Council has outlined is happening, but it'd be good, given the fact that this was raised as an issue for communities, if we could find out what's happening with that.
Yeah,
The
members content with that?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I have another one just from Kelly Brown then.
The only other one I have is 4.6. I don't know whether maybe it's just me being me, but the document link doesn't appear to be working for the Making a Difference civil service document that's in that page. Would it be possible if, now I don't know whether it was just highlighted to say that is the document, but if we're able to get a copy of that would be useful.
Yeah, members content with that. And then Brian. Yeah, Brian, please.
Yeah, I mean, just on 4.2, I'm not clear what the issue of concern is. I mean, we're being reimbursed for employing people for DWP services, my understanding. But if we're going to get some further correspondence on it, but it's not clear to me what the issue is, because we are it is for staff who are employed doing work for them, you know.
Yeah, do you want to come back on that, Kelly?
I think it was more a case that the Fiscal Council had just said, they had noted in page 19 of that report that they'd sent us that there was a lack of transparency, and it says in the response they've given us here that it's across all the departments and that the finance are working on that. So it'd just be good, if somebody raises it to us as a scrutiny committee or it's in a report that we see, let's just make sure, what I think that the Fiscal Council actually says what they're getting it for, don't have a problem with. It's how it's being used and how it's accounted for is the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the way I read it as well. And I suppose I do make the point as chair in debates that transparency remains a general issue and something that we are always seeking to improve, those linkages to specific items and programme for government and all that. So in that sense, I think it's useful any further information we get.
Well, could I just ask, what's the correspondence directly from the Fiscal Council? And if so, why is some of the details redacted in the email?
Yeah, I'm not.
Or was it from an individual?
Details in the bottom. There's things in there like email addresses, so we redacted that. That was originally a report from the Fiscal Council sent to the committee, and the committee then decided to write to them to ask a few questions about it, and that's their reply to it. The two areas raised are just at the top there, point 1 and point 2, that the committee originally raised.
Is it a formal reply from the Fiscal Council?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Right.
Emailed in.
Right.
And it's just the personal details that are redacted.
Yeah, personal details. Yeah.
Okay.
Sian?
Thanks, Chair. It's about the same fiscal report. And I was just wondering how the department decides how the fee income is used, so whether it's ring fenced for related services, or does it go into the wider departmental spending? I think that could be really useful to know.
Yep, members content we seek that information? Yep, thank you. Okay, members, anything else in those items 4.2 to 4.6? No, thank you. Then, members, just in relation to item 4.4, are you content that the committee staff reply to say that we are content to wait until the end of the month for a fuller response from the Equality and Social Justice Committee in the Welsh Assembly, given their reply? Thank you. Members, then, you've been also provided in... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sian.
Sorry, Chair. It was just to say, because obviously I know that there's a response from our Scottish equivalent as well in the table pack, and they are a wee bit later. I think their debate is going to be the middle of September or middle of May. So do we try and join those up, or do we just, I suppose, wait until we get both responses in? I'm just wondering.
Well, I suppose we respond when we can to the Welsh then in anticipation of the Scottish one, and then draw the strands together as they...
Yeah, I think if we go back to Wales first, just to say we're content with what they're saying, but we're also waiting on Scotland coming to us. So once we get all of that back, then we maybe think about a joint letter, a joint approach.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And we are coming on now then to the table papers, and at page 3 there on your table there's a summary of further items under matters rising. So those are 4.8 to 4.10. I think you've already dealt with one of those there, Kelly. Is there anything else in relation to any of those items that members wish to raise or discuss? No. Okay, thank you. So then members are otherwise content with the matters rising as noted in the tables. Yep, thank you. So correspondence, members, then is first memo is at page 32 of your main pack, and there's a table correspondence memo at page 14 of your table papers. So I'll go through those items as usual by number and group, and ask if you want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So can I ask if members have any comments then on items 5.2 to 5.6? Go ahead, Kelly.
Just 5.2, I know that the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, it talks about, the departments, but I'm just wondering, should we ask the Housing Executive, given their role and the changes to the points system, what positive actions are being taken to deliver the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, because they are an arm's length body and they may have other items there that might be useful for us to get details on.
Yeah, members content with that. I would also like to check on 5.2, are members content to forward this query from the TEO committee to the department for comment as well? If members are content, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, as a member TEO committee, the committee members are keen, whilst TEO took the lead on ending violence against women and girls, that it was an executive-wide strategy, so that it was to ask then each department, and I know the main funding going out through councils and so on is through TEO, but that every department sees that they have responsibilities and should be seeing what they are doing, to promote the strategy and the actions in it.
Yeah, and funny, I am aware that in my own local community group, there are discussions ongoing with the council around that, and I'm very much welcome the fact that it's moving out in that fashion out into communities relatively speedily and in a very collaborative way, I have to say. So it's interesting to see it hitting the ground in that sense. So I think that's something that absolutely to be welcomed, something clearly we need to really have a game changer on in terms of how we are engaging with all of that and how we drive forward improvement across all, as you say, Brian, all, not only departments, but all facets of life and society here. Kelly?
Well, no, it's a different point on that correspondence, 5.3. The Disability Act, just a question, do we respond to this consultation ourselves, or is it just up to individual members to do that, or will the committee have a response?
You could respond, or you could ask for a synopsis of the responses to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring it up is just that the Disability Action Plan obviously is about the internal workings of the department and how they deal with people with disabilities and their commitments to having a good relationship. But given the fact that we've heard from the expert panels about how they feel about how, the work that they did on the potential disability strategy was sort of, they're not included in the last piece. Now, I do believe that the Minister has said that they will have, well, I think some of those expert panels and working groups might have sight of the final draft before it comes to us, but it's just that reflection, I don't know whether there's any reflection within the department on how those people have felt about that approach.
Yeah, and I suppose linked to that, I'm not sure exactly which item it was, but there was one around the terms of reference, and it would remain for me a bit of a question of how clear the terms of reference that are established for this type of work are communicated to the groups. So I'm not sure how we draw those together into. I wonder, what about, could we forward that briefing item maybe into the.
They have offered a briefing session if you wish on this as well.
Well, maybe we should take the session.
It runs until the 30th of May. If you want, we could get them in early post-Easter recess.
Yeah, I think we maybe should. It is an important one for this committee, I think. Brian, go ahead.
And just so to understand, in terms of this Disability Action Plan, is this an annual action plan for the department, and is it separate then from the wider strategy?
Yeah.
So this plan is 2025 to 2030. Yes. That's the scope of this plan.
2030.
Yeah.
But it's a separate process from the strategy, but it'll feed into it, obviously.
This isn't a more internal piece, but obviously it's related in a sense, but separate too. But in essence, it's separate. It's for the department itself in terms of how they deal with those issues and support staff. And
every department has disability action plans, different plans. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get the briefing scheduled and share that. Maybe it's good. Okay, any other items then within that block?
The only other one I have, Chair, is 5.4.
Yeah.
The LCM. We have the LCM. It's gone through. The Minister confirmed that the amendment that has been made means that I was a bit concerned about this, that a Minister and the Secretary of State can make changes to employment rights here without having to go through the Assembly. And I'm just wondering, I know that the amendment was laid down by the Minister for the Economy to ensure that Northern Ireland, has a bit more control over that. It's maybe if we could seek clarification. It's not a case that we don't trust the Minister, but this has an impact on the devolved settlement, as I said during my speech. And I fully expect any Minister that be bringing in anything new would probably have had to pass it through the executive, but it's just to give the Assembly its place. Like, for instance, any changes could be brought forward through affirmative. Could we maybe ask if there would be an approach taken that includes, like the RHI recommendation 38, that there's more transparency on this, and would the Minister what's his plans to ensure that the scrutiny aspect of any changes will be able to be happened? Because I know there was one of the pieces of evidence that we received, I think it might have been from Unite, wasn't the Equality Commission, but I think it was from Unite, to say that the public scrutiny was missing on that part.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's worthwhile having that, because it does mention, I think, the Department and Assembly. So I think it is worthwhile clarifying in the first instance and then seeing where that takes us. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, members. Anything else? 5.2. Okay, then at table papers, members, the page 14, there's further items under correspondence. So could I ask if members have any comments on items from 5.8 to 5.14? Yes, Brian, go ahead.
Well, just to comment on the 3-year social housing development programme, I mean, there's a number of developments which I'm aware of that are in process, and some are included there and some are not, so I'll be following those up with the housing executive, because there's some other ones I thought would have been in there, but and as I say, that's a matter I will chase up. I just wonder, I'm surprised actually there's some seem to be omitted, but I'll chase that up separately.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Anything else in relation to that section item, members? No, members content. Okay, thank you. So, members, would at item 5.10, would you be consented we receive a briefing post-Easter recess on the raised paper on homelessness legislation in other jurisdictions? It's quite a detailed paper, and I think it would be good information for committee to have. Okay, so members otherwise content with, as noted on the memo, at 5.8 to 5.14? Yep. Thank you, members. Members, then, before the departmental briefing on the sign language bill, we had asked the Examiner of Statutory Rules for comments on the Delegated Powers Memorandum. So I propose we now go into closed session to be briefed on this now. Our members agreed?
Agreed.
Yep. Clerk, could you take us into closed, please?
Committee.
Okay, members, so we are ready to resume at agenda item 6, which is a departmental briefing on the sign language bill. So, members, you have been provided with the following papers relevant to today's session. The copy of the bill at page 127, research paper there at page 139, Delegated Powers Memorandum at page 198, and the previous departmental briefing paper at page 205. So I now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting this morning. We have Mr. Tommy McCauley, who is Acting Head of Sign Language Policy and Legislation, Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch. We have Gerard Flynn, Deputy Principal, Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch, and Patricia Leaper, who is Deputy Principal, Sign Language Policy and Legislation Branch also. So Tommy, I think it is yourself maybe that is going to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll get to members' questions.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. As Chair has said, I'm Tommy McCauley, Acting Head of Sign Language Partner, Policy and Legislation Branch, accompanied by Patricia Leaper and Gerard Flynn, also from the branch. I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to attend today, to answer any queries you may have and to provide the clarifications which you may seek to assist you with your scrutiny of the Sign Language Bill. The Sign Language Bill is enabling legislation which will place statutory duties on prescribed organisations to provide access to their information and services through British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language. We are aware that the committee has concerns that the bill has introduced contains, as quoted, extensive Henry VIII powers. Therefore, the Department has provided the committee with the Delegated Powers Memorandum, and I trust you have had the opportunity to consider its contents. The Memorandum explains the purpose of the delegated powers chosen within the bill, the reason for the delegation and the rationale for the chosen control. The bill does not intend to make regulations with respect to the functions under policy remits of other departments. The demarcation of departmental functions and the need for executive approval on cross-cutting matters prohibits such course of action. Delegated power is the standard safeguard which is used in order to prevent the need for minor changes to primary legislation. Its use gives the department more flexibility to decide when or how to implement the facilitation of the use of BSL and ISL through consultation with the prescribed organisations and members of the deaf community, and they are limited to the cultural and linguistic needs of the deaf community. It does therefore seek to future-proof the bill, providing the Department with the ability and agility to make regulations quickly, to tackle unforeseen circumstances, which is important in the modern world where change is rapid and often unforeseen. This is a key lesson learned from the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, when the deaf community felt forgotten about, isolated and extremely vulnerable, and with good reason. The community has sought assurances that this cannot happen again. This bill seeks to provide such assurances. Thank you for your time, and we're happy to take your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with a couple and then go to members. So, and I know you have set out there an explanation around the need for those Henry VIII powers. However, would you have concerns around the potential ability to keep the bill in a future time on track with what the department are trying to achieve? So, and what is it? Can you outline for us exactly what is it the bill is intended to achieve? How would the landscape look differently following this bill than it does currently?
The bill seeks to officially recognise both languages, British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language, and promote the interests of British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language. And if I could just compare and contrast that with the legislation in Scotland and the UK BSL Act. The Scottish legislation seeks to promote BSL. The UK legislation BSL Act seeks to promote BSL through the establishment of an advisory group. We've gone beyond that, and in addition to official recognition of both languages and the statutory duty upon the department to promote both languages, it will place statutory duties on prescribed organisations to provide reasonable access to their services and information. So in that regard, we've gone further than the other jurisdictions. How we do that is the question. Had the bill been introduced back in 2016 when it was first consulted upon through part of the framework, the chances are, with the infrastructure in place then, it would look different to what it is now. While the Assembly wasn't sitting, we have embarked on an investment in the infrastructure that will support this bill through accredited qualifications that will provide the cohort of students and give them the pathway to qualify as professionals in interpreting, translation, or as teachers. What we're seeking to do, what came out of the COVID emergency, was the total lack of access to information. And as we all know, the first tool we had in the toolbox against COVID was public health information. And I had referred in our previous appearance in front of the committee that in early March I received an email from a member of the deaf community in a panic saying the deaf community are isolated. Some of the interpreters are seeking on a voluntary basis to translate information. Can you help? We at that point went to the Health and Social Care Board and we established a hub which led to the Health and Social Care interpreting contract, which is now established. You then had the rollout of the interpreters at ministerial briefings. We also funded a community initiative to translate COVID information from mainstream media. So those are things that were unforeseen in November 2019, let alone before then. And all of a sudden in March 2020 we went into lockdown. A lot of the things that may impact the bill going forward will be unforeseen. I mean, we just have to look at the global situation now to look at that.
Well, sorry, I suppose I do get that, and I know we will be dealing with that. I should have probably said from the outset, actually, just to indicate we really welcome the bill. I want to frame it that, and I should have done that at the outset. And I know there will be unforeseen things, and we will come as a result of committee. But I suppose I don't want to dwell too much on that today, rather than to say we will seek to see how we can satisfy ourselves that the powers transferred will be able to be used in a positive way to align. So just as a further development of, and you're talking about the health issue there, so what bodies do you envisage as being prescribed organisations at this stage? Just to give me a further insight.
Okay, we have embarked on an exercise contacting our counterparts in the other departments, asking for lists of their public bodies for consideration under this bill. We have also embarked on another exercise looking into the CPD framework for interpreting and it lists public bodies. So what we'll do when we receive those lists is compare and contrast them and to see are there gaps. Now, what we can't do, and it feeds into the narrative of Henry VIII powers, we can't dictate to other departments who should be their public bodies, but we can have a conversation with them, because the list that we receive, we will have to consult with those listed organisations in any case.
So the bill is designed to ensure that people who have additional communication needs via sign languages can access public services,
Yes.
including health. So how does that square with saying that we cannot dictate to the Department of Health, for example, as to what our expectations are?
Because the
And
legislation...
particularly, Tommy, sorry for interrupting, particularly in light of the fact that there is peppered throughout the bill that we have in front of us, words like practical, reasonable, you know. So how do we ensure, are you not seeking to hold them to account for what they must do?
Yes, what the bill will do, and I mentioned at the outset in my opening remarks, that it will recognise both languages, it will place a statutory duty upon us to promote both languages, which we will do vigorously. It also, at clause 3, places those duties on prescribed organisations to ensure reasonable access to their services and information. And through our promotion role and through the mechanism we'll have for this, bear in mind, is the Sign Language Partnership Group. And that is chaired by us, the Secretariat's chaired by us. It's represented by members of the deaf community, representatives of the deaf community, and also from other executive departments. Once the bill comes in, it'll place statutory duties on those departments to ensure that there is reasonable access to their information and services. So in that regard, those prescribed organisations are tied in. Now, you did mention there are issues of practicality and affordability.
Well, what I'm really saying is the use of the word practical and affordability something that could hollow out the intent of the bill rather than the issues with it?
If prima facie, you would think, okay, it's get out of jail cards for prescribed organisations, we can't afford it, it's impracticable. But if you look at that in detail, it's additional hoops for them to jump through. Well, how can you not afford it? What's your budget? How is it impracticable? Now, the impracticable side would be probably, I've asked for an interpreter, I can't get one, which is why we've begun investing in an interpreter training programme, 2 in fact, one through a deaf training centre and one through Queen's University in Mayo. So there are statutory duties that will be imposed upon all prescribed organisations and permanently upon departments to ensure.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to members, and someone may be picking up on some of these issues as well, but thank you so far. Go ahead, Brian, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks for your attendance today again. Just as a preamble question, when ISL BSL will be recognised as a language of Northern Ireland, does that apply? What other languages does that apply to? You might know the answer to that, but
well,
what else is classified as a language of Northern Ireland?
British and Irish.
Yeah.
English and Irish.
Although,
Irish,
yeah,
in legislation.
Yeah.
It's something I can follow up. It's just to know.
you have the Language and Identity Act
Yeah.
that deals with Irish language. English is accepted as an official language, although there's no UK constitution, so that's
unwritten constitution. Yeah. Okay. It's a side question. In terms of, as you described, this is enabling legislation. So I am wondering, even when the bill passes, will it still be a work in progress, the whole issue, in terms of what is provided? And given that there was legislation in England in 2022, that's correct, and then there was also in Scotland and Wales. In terms of how this ends up in practical terms, that's what I'm trying to understand, and that's what many groups will be understanding, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And private sector groups which get public funding, we talk about some health services. And how do we end up at what is considered reasonable steps and for information and services to be as accessible? And there's a clause there about affordability. How do you think it is likely to look You couldn't expect every public service to have somebody standing, waiting, you know, for two sign languages, but they would need to have access to sign language services, perhaps online or by arrangement and so on. How do you think it'll flesh out?
Okay. If I could just deal with it in the context of the other jurisdictions that you raised, the BSL Scotland Act was enacted in 2015, and I think it promoted BSL and committed public bodies to develop plans to contribute to a national plan. I think the first national plan was 3 years after the enactment, with additional plans, I think, every 5 years, if I'm correct. The UK BSL Act established an advisory body, a non-statutory advisory body to the DWP Minister. And the aim of that is to produce a report for consideration by the DWP Minister. It may well have been the first one after a year or two after enactment in 2022. If you look at the Irish Sign Language Act, it was enacted in December 2017, but commenced in December 2020. And the rationale for that was to give space and time to develop the infrastructure to support the aims and the provisions of the legislation. Things like ensuring there are enough interpreters. Now, we've been trying to get ahead of the curve on that by investing in our interpreter translation and teaching capacity through funding of various courses. We are currently working with the British Deaf Association to co-design best practice. That will then inform the statutory guidance that will fill in, I suppose, what you're getting at, the missing pieces of the primary legislation. I mean, bear in mind that the primary legislation is there to set the infrastructure and the tone and the direction. Our aim then would be to include that statutory guidance in the sign language framework, which is being refreshed at the same time as this work is progressing. You may recall it was consulted on 2016, and in recognition that there's been quite a passage of time, we are refreshing that. That will carry the statutory guidance because it, to all intents and purposes, will be the strategy with action, recommended actions for public bodies to take forward. We then intend, once that refresh framework is finalised, to bring it to the Sign Language Partnership Group for sign-off, then to bring it to the executive. Because the commitment first time round was that after the consultation, the framework would be brought back to the executive to consider. So this period of time on, the executive will consider, and then we go out to public consultation on the agreed document. So in answer to your question, as we've been, I suppose, holding our roadshows and presentations with the deaf community, we've been managing those expectations that day after enactment, the lights don't suddenly flick on. There will be a period of time while public bodies, as you say, get used to the idea, while we consider are there enough interpreters? One of the things we're considering for that is the health and social care model, the Regional Communication Support Service, which provides for free interpreting, lip reading and note taking for deaf BSL SL users and other deaf people who use health and social care services. So there will be, upon enactment, there'll be some things that can start straight away, and there'll be other things subject to the statutory guidance and to the infrastructure being in place. Might take just a little bit longer.
Two other supplementary questions, Chair, if I may.
Briefly, please.
In Scotland, I noticed that the 27 Act recognises different forms of BSL. So, anyway, are we assuming there's one standardised form of BSL? Or I don't know, is there a Scottish variant? But
no, if I could explain that, probably what you're referring to, I'm guessing, is tactile, hands-on, haptic signing, which the members of the deaf blind community use, and that is reflected in our legislation for BSL and RSL, that different forms of signing, Clause 12, a reference in this part to BSL or RSL is either or both of the visual form of the language is commonly used and understood by deaf people, and the common tactile or non-visual forms of the language as used and understood by some deaf-blind people. So, similar to Scotland.
That will be the case here?
Yes.
Right. And last question, just about the prescribed list, and is it correct then that the department, I don't know whether the prescribed list will be in place and complete at the time when the bill is passing, or will it follow? And is it correct then that any amendments to the prescribed list will have to go through the Assembly by way of SR, or is it just something that the Minister or officials keep? But would legislation be required to amend it?
Yeah, it's the prescribed lists will be done through negative resolution, so the legislation will be made through an SL1, and it can be amended through negative resolution to remove or add a prescribed organisation. So that would be the mechanism that you'd approach that through.
At least it'll not be something that can be changed without us being aware.
No,
yes.
No. An SL1 will have to go to the committee. And just on another point, we can't actually make those regulations until we have the power. So we've got royal assent. But we expect when we get royal assent, those regulations will be more or less ready to go. So there'll just be a list of public bodies. We're putting SL1 through the committee, and just can take it from there.
You think that might be ready?
Oh yes, we expect to have the list of public bodies ready as soon as royal assents come in. So we can list the public bodies. The only clause that we really wouldn't be commencing is clause 3, the duties on the prescribed organisations, until the proper structures, the statutory guidance is in place, and then once we've got all those in place, then we'll commence clause 3, which will place the statutory duties in all those prescribed organisations.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Deputy Chair wants to come in just briefly on that point, and then I will be going to Kelly, Morris, back to Nicola, and Melissa. We do have your indication as well.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to go back in on that point about the removal of a public body or prescribed body. Has the department given any thought as to making it subject to affirmative resolution and actually letting it go through Assembly properly? Because that's a major thing if you're removing a public body from having to provide this service.
The way we've considered this is just a list of public bodies, and it's a technical list of what is established as public bodies. Anybody on that list will be subject to clause 3. The position we're taking is that if you're a public body, you'll be listed, and to that element. So the only argument a public body would have not to be on this list would be argue that we're not a public body, and therefore we shouldn't be on this list.
And just on that as well, they must be consulted. All those public bodies to be considered as prescribed organisations, we have to consult with them. So at that point, they can make their case whether or not they should be.
Before the fact, they have to be consulted with.
Yes, we have to consult with them in advance for the final list.
But I just wonder, would you give it any thought then as to making it, let it go through the Assembly and go through proper scrutiny for a public body to be removed instead of the department, albeit bringing it to committee, but being able to make that their decision yourselves?
I mean, the department don't think necessarily it needs affirmative, but I mean, if the committee of the opinion that it's something that is the interest of the committee and what's going to it's an option, to go to the affirmative. Yeah. But the benefit of the negative is the SL1 will go to the committee listing the public bodies, and with the negative process, that can be changed and removed relatively quickly. So if for example, there was something in the future and there was a public body to be added who was operating not as the functions of a public body, maybe a charity or something, took responsibility for an area, and there were some circumstances, then that charity operating as the function could be added quickly to that public list. Whereas when you're going through the affirmative procedure, it'll take just a little bit longer to get that list.
And that's probably even more so for removing a public body. If a public body no longer exists, there's the administrative burden on the Assembly, the department, the committee, of going through that process of affirmative resolution.
We'll keep an eye on that. So Kelly, go ahead please.
Sticking with that issue of the public bodies, I'm a bit confused. I think it's too vague. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of negative resolution, but can I just check clause 4.4, public character and public bodies? That's two different things. So how does that line up? I spoke earlier today about for example, a dentist who is a private contractor says, I don't have the money, or I don't have the availability of an interpreter, so I can't provide this service for a deaf person. They're providing a public character, but they're not a public body. But will they be? You know, it's that's very vague.
With regards to a dentist, they can avail of the regional communication support service that Health and Social Care provides, so it's free.
They may. They may avail of it.
They can avail of it.
But they may. But that's the thing. They could decide that it's.
Another example, I suppose, if you're looking at the regional communication support service, which is overseen by the Department of Health and funded by the Department of Health, but the actual contract is carried out by Sign Language Interactions, which is a private company. So they're carrying out a function of a public nature, so they would be, as part of the terms of the contract, expected to comply. Now, for that particular organisation, given that they provide interpreters, it shouldn't be a major issue. But any private enterprise that carries out on the contract a function for a public body, then yes, the terms of contract would be expected to reflect this, if it is deemed that it falls within the ambit of cultural and linguistic accessibility,
Okay.
for a deaf person.
I just think that the public character element in that clause sort of opens that up to a supermarket, or, you know, because it depends what you consider as a public character, public service.
If I could just add that, I mean, any information, clause 3 would come in there that provide reasonable access to information and services, and that's public information and services. So if a private organisation is carrying out that function on behalf of a public body, on behalf of the department.
To be honest, why are we concentrating so much on public? This is the Sign Language Act that's or bill, to help people who require sign language. The legislation should be far-reaching, because this is something we've waited on for a long time, whether public or private. And that's why I wondered, when we talk about affordability, in that clause 3, affordability and reasonableness, why was there not an inclusion of a reference to the Disability Discrimination Act and the requirements of it within that clause?
Because there actually is, if you read the legislation, clause 1, nothing in this part affects the operation of either of these, particularly as relevant to the rights of individuals in the deaf community, A, to any rule of law, or B, any other statutory provision.
Okay.
So the DDA, Section 75, all remain in place. They're all there as avenues of challenge for deaf people as they choose to go down that route. But this bill brings in cultural and linguistic access and rights.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take away from, for example, the DDA. There's a paper by a Flemish deaf academic, Martie de Mulder, and she made the point that sign language legislation makes explicit the implicit nature of adjustment under disability. So the benefits of this piece of legislation should inform and enhance DDA should a deaf person seek challenge under that. So it's not to replace it, but I don't think, I mean, if we start listing every other piece of legislation that this may come into contact with, then we'll have quite a...
On that, I'm a little bit concerned, having been through this process myself, consequential amendments that will impact on other departments. Although in clause 7 it says that you can't confer specific functions on other departments, there may well be a requirement under the consequential amendments for other departments to have to update their legislation. Have you guys started any work with the other departments in that legislation to see how far-reaching this is actually going to be? Because it's, to be honest, the powers that are coming in this are quite strong, and we want to make sure that everybody complies and the legislation is updated.
We've not identified any consequential amendments to any other pieces of legislation that needs to be done through this bill. Clause 3 puts the duty, and that's in respect to the prescribed organisations. But in the future, we may need consequential amendments. And we're looking at considerations for stuff like written applications or written requests that may be in statute or in law. And it may be the case that we could put an exception into those pieces of legislation to say someone in sign can make this application in sign language. And that may require us the ability to consequentially amend other pieces of legislation that demands written things. So these are the sort of things that, as technology improves and access improves, we may have to move out. And issues like that is directly affecting the deaf community, written applications or interviews, etc., etc. We may put consequential amendments around those issues.
My final questions is, it's more a request for information. Is there an opportunity for our committee, even if it's given to us in confidence, that sign language framework work that was done back in 2016, is there any report or summary of the findings for that that could be shared? Because I know it wasn't published. And also, is there an opportunity to see the terms of reference for the sign language SLPG group? It's just to sort of work out what their terms of reference were on that one. Yeah, and the only other thing I wanted to ask about then was, for goodness sake, it's going out of my head. So you've said the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland, have they had any comment back to yourselves about the reasonable adjustments? Because affordability really grinds my gears, to be honest, because if someone's in a wheelchair and an organisation isn't fit to put a ramp in, they can be taken to the cleaners, but a deaf person, because of affordability and access to interpreters, could be excluded. But I'm just wondering, has the Equality Commission said anything to you guys?
No, we've had nothing back from the Equality Commission as of yet. Regarding the original framework consultation findings, we will seek permission to do that. We're happy to appear in a closed session. That would help. Just on that, we began a refresh back in COVID, because again there'd been a body of time had elapsed, and also what we learned from COVID changed things drastically. So I refer back to a bill back in 2016 would be different to now, and looking ahead to make, as Jared was saying, in 5-10 years time could be totally different. So that's why we say we need the agility and ability to react and not to isolate the deaf community. Sign Language Partnership Group terms of reference, yes, we can supply those. We are also, in parallel with the work on the bill, reconstituting the Sign Language Partnership Group. What we want to do is reframe the narrative of what actually consultation is. That there is a concept that consultation may just be either a formal public consultation or with deaf organisations. A lot of our engagement, stakeholder engagement and consultation, is with individual deaf sign language users, service users. An example would be when Carrickfergus Castle was our historic environment colleagues were looking at making that more accessible to deaf people. A deaf service user advised them. That's consultation. So we want to reflect that within our Sign Language Partnership Group, that it's not just organisations. And those are one of the organisations made a point to me at COVID that co-design, co-production is great, and that's been accepted. But they're kind of being overwhelmed. There's a consultation fatigue. So we want to broaden the model for consultation and reflect that in the Sign Language Partnership Group. So yes, we will look into the consultation summary being delivered, terms of reference, no problem, and we'll keep you updated through this process on the new constitution.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Maurice, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. We've had a comprehensive brief before you came in there on the various clauses, and as the Chair has already said, we want to get this legislation over the line, but we want to get it over in a form that we don't have to revisit it again and again because we've made a mistake. But, you know, one of the things that I am really pleased about is you said that you intend to hit the ground running once the bill's enacted. And in preparation for that, you've had a significant increase in registered interpreters, and you're training 4 at the Foyle Deaf Association and 20 BSL and ASL MA students at Queen's. How many of those students are actually studying BSL, and how many are actually studying ASL? Are there, and I think this would be a silly question I'm going to ask anyway, are there any students studying both?
With regards to Foyle Deaf Association, out of the 6 of each language, 4 are now approaching their final assessment and waiting on their results. The Queen's University MA is now 19 students. I can provide the breakdown at a later date. I'll get those. I don't want to misinform you. And if it helps, I can get you a breakdown of BSL, ISL, deaf and hearing. None would be studying both.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, we have one, I think, bilingual interpreter who went through one of our previous funded training programs, but no, it would be BSL, ISL. For the point, I mean, the interpreters, and I think there's the Association of Sign Language Interpreters have a diagram that shows the length of time it takes to qualify as an interpreter, and I'm hoping it's tongue-in-cheek, make the point that it takes longer to qualify as an interpreter than it does as a doctor, because when you think about it, you have to go through the qualifications from beginner, all the stuff we did at school, and then do your professional qualifications and assessments for the interpreter training. So it is quite a lengthy process. So it would be quite a cumbersome task to expect students to do both at the same time.
Yeah, look, I'm really impressed with the numbers you have training already, and I hope that the cohort increases as the years go on, because it's nice having a sign language bill, but if we don't have enough interpreters to enact that bill, we're really in trouble. So I'm really pleased to see that you're concentrating on that part. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morris. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to go touch again on the consultation part. I know in clause 5 and clause 8, I think it is, they both mention the department will consult with at least one person or group preparing the department to be acting on behalf of the deaf community. So I think that's just a bit weak, to be honest, that you could get away with just consulting with one member or group in regards to this here, whether it be issuing guidance or those procedures for making new regulations. So would you be willing to rejig that there, so that you'd be having to consult with more people or groups?
I suppose going back to my previous answer on the Sign Language Partnership Group and that very issue of one person, we wanted to reframe the narrative that consultation has many gears. With regards to the Carrickfergus Castle, they consulted with a deaf BSLS who happened to be bilingual BSLSL user to advise them on what would be the right model for making it more accessible to the deaf community. Now, we think that was reasonable. The deaf signer thought that was reasonable because you're seeking the input from a service user. The Regional Communication Support Service provided by the Department of Health has an advisory board upon which we sit, but it also has a deaf service user as part of that. So really, I suppose that's a drafting mechanism to make the point that consultation is much more than just going out to deaf organisations, and also to provide that agility for lower level issues to consult if we need to with one or more people. In reality, we have the Sign Language Partnership Group. So in reality, that anything certainly that we have oversight for in our department will be going through the Sign Language Partnership Group, on which you have multiple organisations and you will have deaf individuals, and likewise we would expect other departments to do likewise.
Thank you for that there. I just want to move on. I know we're short in time, but I just want to move on to clause 9 and the duty in the department to publish a report every 5 years monitoring the impact of the Act. Can you explain to me why 5 years was chosen? And again, it can, I know Kelly touched this as well, can seem like quite a long time. Would there be any consideration of reducing that there time?
I mean, if I can get the rationale for the actual 5 years, and it refers to the earlier member's question about will the benefits, I suppose, of the legislation be realisable straight away, and the answer would be no, because it hasn't happened anywhere in the world, not just on these islands. With regards to the Irish Sign Language Act, I'd spoken with colleagues, our counterparts down there, and the authors of the NDA review after 3 years. Now, what came out of that was, even though the Irish Sign Language Act was enacted in 2017, commenced in 2020, that 40% of public bodies were unaware of the legislation's existence, and 30% of requests for interpreter hadn't been met. And that really sort of hit home. You need time to build up the infrastructure. The NDA report wasn't overly positive on the achievements to date. So what we wanted to do is give the legislation time to bed in, give us time to have the infrastructure in place, give prescribed organisations and departments time to develop their action plans, which is going to tell the deaf community in consultation with them how they're going to deliver on this. Otherwise, you could shorten it, but you're almost certainly going to have a skewed negative viewpoint. But it's not, I think Minister had mentioned on the day, he's open to other considerations.
Can I just add to the Deputy Chair, it could be 5 years and 3 years thereafter.
Yeah.
The reason why I say that is because if you go for 5 years, you could effectively wipe out a full mandate without a report being delivered. I know that a lot of other bills come through with, obviously, yes, you're absolutely right, given a longer period at the start, but then after that, 3 years. Yeah.
I could just add that we will be evaluating this on a yearly basis anyway. This would be your statutory report after 5 years. I mean, there will be information available in the interim up to that 5 years.
And if I could just add to that, I mean, the wording is that the first reporting period is the period of not more than 5 years. So, but like yourselves, with it's your limit, not the target for the extension, that will be ours. If we think things are going really well, be assured we will be looking to sing our own praises, and we'll be there as quick as possible. So there, on that, it's an open issue. But the rationale is to give prescribed organisations and ourselves time to make effective change.
Just as we follow up, May, just on in relation to the consultation piece, and I do get what you're saying, Tommy, around being able to be flexible enough to take a quick piece of consultation around something of a lesser nature, but surely in general terms, for more critical things, you should be consulting with more. And I suppose the concern of the committee is that clause would allow the flexibility, but also allow a minimalisation of consultation going down. So surely it should be at least 2 or more organisations. And should those organisations not be on the face of the bill rather than being chosen ad hoc as things go on? Could you not strengthen that provision by increasing the need and naming the organisations?
We are seeing organisations come and organisations go. I mean, the voluntary and community sector is very stressed financially at the moment. For the Sign Language Centre was a founding member of the Sign Language Partnership Group. It's no more. We brought in Foyle Deaf Association, the teaching centre, but what we're looking to do with our new constitution for Sign Language Partnership Group is have the right organisations that represent the deaf community in Northern Ireland and the right service users, non-affiliated deaf individuals. And under the action plans, bring you back to best practice and statutory guidance. Our guidance will be that you must consult through the Sign Language Partnership Group, or should, and there you'll have the British Deaf Association, RNID, NDCS, Association of Sign Language Interpreters, Visual Language Professionals, Action Deaf Youth, Foyle Deaf Association, and multiple individual deaf professionals as service users.
Okay.
That's okay, yeah, thanks, thank you.
Okay, going to Melissa then online.
Fáilte Rómhaig, you're all very welcome. You referred there a number of times to the Irish Sign Language Act of 2017, which actually had created enforceable rights for sign language users to access services. Now, why has the department not created enforceable rights as the Irish Sign Language Bill did do? This is a comment that is often made by people that this bill, we'll say currently, is much weaker than the Irish Sign Language Bill of 2017.
I can answer that. The Irish Bill does put enforceable rights in, but they're also reasonable. There's a reasonable test in that. We have also put enforceable rights in here in relation to Clause 3. So we're putting a duty on prescribed organisations to do interpretation and services, which is quite similar to down south legislation.
And the statutory guidance that will inform that access will be developed in consultation with the deaf community. As a reference, the best practice that will feed into that is being currently drafted by the British Deaf Association will be brought to the full Sign Language Partnership Group. That will be the basis then for the drafting of the statutory guidance. So in that sense, again, we go back to the consultation. There are many gears of consultation that we're employing here. Co-design, sign off of the actual design document that will feed into the statutory guidance that will inform reasonableness and access to services as laid out in Clause 3. And these will place statutory duties on prescribed organisations and on departments permanently.
So it's effectively an expectation in the future rather than from the outset, i.e. in terms of enforceable rights.
I mean, as soon as the statutory guidance has been consulted on through the framework, and then it'll be commenced. I would draw the parallel with the ISL Act. The 2017 it was enacted, and its first review 6 years later. There are issues, as I've mentioned, with regards to 40% of bodies not knowing of its existence and 30% of requests for interpreting not being met. We don't want to go down the same avenue of legislating for failure, which is why we're investing in the infrastructure now, and hopefully other departments will come on board with that as work on this bill progresses, and not just post enactment. I mean, now going forward, we're already in discussions. We made that clear at our last Sign Language Partnership Group last week that we expect departments to bring their expertise, knowledge and resources to this issue.
Yeah, I can totally appreciate that in terms of having the infrastructure in order to cope with it. Gurmil Malgat. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Tommy, or whichever of you, Clause 7.3 of the bill delegates power to the department to assign statutory functions to a range of bodies. So I'm just wondering, what are the nature of the functions that you anticipate being conferred under those powers?
That will be in the exercise of Clause 3. The statutory duties to, amongst other things, take reasonable steps to provide access to services and information. Anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I could add something to that. 7.3, it enables us to make regulations that will put these, the gains, the reasonableness, the affordability into regulations. But that's not the approach we're taking here. We're looking at codifying statutory guidance. So reasonableness, affordability will all be defined within the guidance which is co-designed with the deaf community, rather than leave that definition up to individual departments and prescribed organisations. We get consistency by having statutory guidance saying, here's your sign language plan, you get a request in, you take these procedures, you give this reply in relation to it. That 7.3 enables us, if, for example, there was an area that wasn't working or was dispute about, to come in and actually put through regulations, actual functions that they were required to act, rather than following the guidance. You will actually have to follow the regulations. So the regulations in 7.3 are somewhat of a safety net for us to address issues that may not be working through the guidance, or may, for example, be disputed in the court and needs rectified, maybe through regulations. But we've no intention to put these duties on 7.3 through regulations at this point at all. We expect that the statutory guidance and the sign language plans developed by the departments and prescribed organisations will address all the issues around accessibility, affordability, reasonableness. And that's the approach. But we need that power in 7.3 in case there's some dispute on a particular issue, maybe around affordability, and we have to actually come in and regulate and define what affordability is under law. If, for example, a court took a different approach, we can correct that in regulations.
And again, if I could just add to that, we look at the regional communication support service model, that it provides for video relay service, video remote interpreting, and other, I suppose, technological services that they outset of this journey from 2015 when we first started may not have been available. As things evolve and the advent of AI may bring more opportunities for technology, then it says that willing to exercise more functions in the interest of the deaf community. So things that don't exist now may change. And again, we keep going back to that term. We would need the ability and agility to move with the times, I suppose. So functions mainly now would be providing access to your information and your services through BSL, ISL, through hands-on tactile BSL or ISL.
Well, Kelly,
I was going to say this is an important part of what the committee needs to think about and would like to see is what those regulations you're intending to bring forward might look like, because it does say at the power to make regulations, the department may make regulations, not must make regulations. There's no timetable on it. We've already had experience through the department, for instance, the gambling regulations. We still don't have guidance out on that a few years later. I just have concerns that we don't have enough information at this stage about those regulations, and it's conferring the law that is being written is the one that confers the responsibilities on the other departments. And I'm a bit worried that we're talking all about affordability instead of actually how this is going to improve the lives of people who use sign language. So why is it may make regulations, not must make regulations?
If I could just come in there on the affordability issue and may and must make regulations and the ability and agility of the department to reflect that. If you look at, again, the health and social care model is...
I just say it's not the be all and end all, because we have a lady who went into labour and her and her husband were deaf and they had no help.
Yes, that is true, and I've had emails to that effect. But again, with any service, you will have that. But it's a big sea change to what was there beforehand. Now, if access to information and services, the big money ticket will be interpreting or translations. Now, how do we do that? And that's what we're looking at now. We're involved in an exercise of collating data from the CPD framework, whereby public bodies can draw down interpreters. They pay for it themselves. So we're looking at how many requests have there been, what has the cost been, but not only that, why have other public bodies not used them? Is it they haven't had a request or they haven't had the budget? So that has informed us to, I suppose, what is really a binary consideration for access to information through interpreters. Do you go with a status quo CPD framework and people draw down and pay for their own interpreters, or is there a case to be made for a regional service similar to the health and social care model, where it is centrally funded, reflecting the fact that this legislation, as we know, we are currently the coordinating department. The legislation will make us the lead department. And other organisations have their own responsibilities. In essence, it's an executive bill in that it's cross-cutting and it needed executive approval. Therefore, the consideration is, as you were, and individual public bodies, departments pay their own way, or is there a case to be made for a central service, at which point it's free at contract, and which point, I suppose, the affordability consideration becomes null and void. So that is another body of work. And I know, I sense the frustrations from the committee that we're taking a lot of powers to make regulations because we don't know all the answers currently. We hope to soon. We hope to develop the framework soon, reconstitute the Sign Language Partnership Group and have clarity on how it's going to be funded, as you were, or a Northern Ireland model. And at that point, those can all be embedded within the legislation. If we do it now and it can't be done, you have primary legislation that will need changed.
If I could just add as well, the way we're approaching this with the statutory guidance and the code of sign element, so we're looking at approaching the deaf community to give us what's accessible, what's reasonable for the deaf community, rather than looking at a statutorial sort of definition of reasonableness. By producing that and working with the deaf community, we hope not to have to make regulations around reasonableness or effectiveness, because the statutory guidance And the sign language plans that we develop by the prescribed organisation should be able to handle that. And also we can adapt quicker with the statutory guidance. So if we see bad practice or something, we can change that and move. If we put that down in statutory legislation and we're trying to adapt to accessibility or reasonableness in statutory legislation, then it's a long process to get that changed. By taking the code of sign element and working with the deaf community, we will change the guidance and put that message out very, very quickly and listen to best practices.
Yeah, it's taking advice before the issue rather than afterwards, and that our whole modus operandi has been working in partnership with the deaf community along this process.
Thank you. Morris, quick one.
We very quick, and just when you're bringing back the information for me on the BSL, ISL, could you also maybe get me the criteria needed? How many members of the deaf community have we got that need BSL? How many have we got that need ISL? And how many people are in training for both to make sure that we have an adequate supply for the majority as well as the minority?
The previous written briefing that we applied to committee deals with that, and as does the explanatory financial memorandum, and it highlights the difficulty of gathering data, which realistically, when you look at it, makes the case for the legislation in that as public service providers across 3 benefits, we sought numbers of BSL-ISL users, and they weren't collated, but they were able to tell us 16 types of deafness. So it kind of makes the case that the deaf community had been misrepresented. Parks and Parks, as part of that work in 2012, released a research paper which highlighted the difficulties in collating numbers of sign language users, and it's not just in Northern Ireland, it's across the piece, other jurisdictions in the world, because that information hasn't been collated. One of the intents of this benefit outcomes of this legislation will be that we could compel prescribed organisations to start collating such information. Now, we even looked at the health and social care contract, but the data whereby we get volumes of calls made or requests for interpreters made, that is multiple. I mean, people go to the doctor multiple times, or recourse to dental appointments, etc. We can give you the number of students in interpreter training programs, and we've committed to doing that alongside the terms of reference of the Sign Language Partnership Group and the consultation report summary from 2016.
Can I just add, I'm sure it makes it very difficult for you, the fact that people who are a bit older, who use sign language, had to go to school down south, and therefore they're ISL users, whereas the younger generation of sign language users go across to Liverpool or here to Jordanstown. So we have that age breakdown of the users of different languages as well. John Carberry's brilliant on the history of sign language. You know.
Interesting you say that. I had a meeting last week with 2 deaf service users. We funded a BSL Heritage project and an ISL Heritage project for the deaf community to collect their story to contribute to, their lifetime. And they made the point, I mean, we were talking about ways of translating the signed video footage in the BSL and ISL could be used at Queen's students, and they made the valid point, and I did know before I even said it, that older generation BSL ISL users use a different form of signing. It's heavily influenced by finger spelling. Younger generation of signers will have, like we do, a more expansive lexicon and vocabulary in signs. So almost like a Matroyski doll. You have BSL, ISL, older generation, younger generation.
Okay, thank you. A quick one, just in terms of the criteria for the prescribed organisations. No, we've talked essentially the criteria is that they're a public body. Are there other criteria available? Have you drafted criteria at this stage? And are those available for committee?
The other criteria is carries out the functions of a public body. So you could have, a charity or someone who's carrying out the functions. We haven't identified at this point in time any organisation that's carrying out the functions of the public body. At this point in time, the lists we have are just basically departments and their ALBs.
Okay, well listen, thank you. So I know this is the first sort of engagement on this, and I welcome actually the detail and the exchange and the interaction with committee. I also have to say welcome the repeated indications around co-design, and that is absolutely welcome. However, I suppose a wee concern is around we're operating in a climate at the same time where the department have indicated a changing approach to co-design, or the Minister has. So I suppose that's something the committee will want to ensure, that that strong co-design element remains within this important area. And I think you have demonstrated that up to now, and I'd like to see that continuing. I know we will have a number of questions following our session that was just in with Examiner for Statutory Rules around legal issues, which we may want to compile and forward to you for a response, a written response, and I'll ask the staff to look at that. But for today, thank you for that, and we look forward to working with you. And what I get a very strong sense is all of our desire to create a really strong piece of legislation that will create real benefit, and that will continue into the future. So thank you for that today. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, members, any further actions in the members? So I think there are a number of things. Could we get agreement that we write to the department in terms of setting out their response to the scrutiny points raised in the bill paper provided by RAISE, if members are content with that?
That would be really helpful.
There's also a number of questions arising from the legal session earlier. If members are content that the staff will compile those and get those out to the department for response. Kelly?
Could I ask if we as a committee could write to the Equality Commission to seek their views on that reasonable, practicable? I say that I've the health and safety certificate, and reasonable practicableness is all throughout that, but it would be really useful if we could find out what the Equality Commission's views are, given the fact that they sort of look after the Disability Discrimination Act stuff.
I presume we will be asking the Equality Commission and Human Rights in general as consultees. I presume we will be asking them to respond in general, but as well as the specific.
Could we also ask, I think they said it was the Foyle Deaf group, it was the Foyle Deaf group, and Queen's for a copy of their course content.
Yeah. Members content with that?
Yeah.
Anything else, members? No, okay, good start. And obviously it's one we're going to be continuing with. We do now need to take another short comfort break ahead of the next item, just to ensure that we have that all set up, and we'll recommence in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Print it out. You print it out.
Aye.
Okay, members, thank you. So that's us back into broadcasting, and we're resuming the meeting at, I don't see the agenda item just, but we're going to table. Yeah. So, tabled item SR 2025/73, the Universal Credit Personal Independence Payment, Job Seekers Allowance and Employment and Support Allowance Claims and Payments Amendment and Modification Regulations NI 2025. Members, a copy of the rule is at page 321 of your table papers. We considered the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on the 27th of March when we were content for the Department to make the rule. The Department has advised that no changes have been made to the policy content of the regulations since the SL1 stage. Do members have any objection to the rule?
No.
No.
Can I then ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/73, the Universal Credit Personal Independence Payment, Job Seekers Allowance and Employment and Support Allowance Claims and Payments Amendment and Modification Regulations NI 2025 and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Do we have another answer? No.
That's the only answer.
That's it, yeah, thank you. Okay, agenda item 7 then, members, we're moving to a briefing by the Housing Policy Panel. So, members, papers for this agenda item are contained at page 220. And I'd now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Siobhan O'Neill, and Siobhan is a Tenant Participation and Community Development Officer supporting communities. Patricia McQuillan, and Patricia is Housing Policy Panel Tenant Advocate and Chair of the HPP. And no, we don't.
Alicia's not here today.
Yeah, so we have Mary Gibson, do we?
No,
Yeah.
it's just an
Okay. And then Bobby McConnell, Housing Policy Panel member. So you're all very, very welcome to Fáilte Roa Bhaile and Shaw and Patricia. Is it yourself that's going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll go to members' questions?
Just myself. So thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for accommodating us this afternoon. Sorry. So as you say, I'm Siobhan O'Neill, and I would facilitate the Housing Policy Panels, with Patricia being our Chair and Tenant Advocate, and Bobby being a representative as well from Radius Housing. So at this stage, I'm just going to pass over to Patricia because I was going to chat through about the Independent Tenant Organisation, but you've had all that information through in the papers. So, go on, Patricia.
So you don't think they want to hear anymore? So we're just all about here about telling us about the Housing Policy Panel, and it's actually made up of tenant reps from Northern Ireland social housing sector. So we actually have representatives from Alpha, Apex, ARC, Choice, Clonmel, Newtonton, New One, Grove, the Housing Executive, of course, Radius, and then Woven. So we're doing well. We're always trying to recruit new members. We would go quite often to the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations to get nice new recruits on board. And it's so nice, but all the housing providers being together in one room for a change. We usually have all the same issues, so it's really good to have that. So we act as a consultative forum for the Department of Communities, and we actually have Department of Communities at every one of our meetings. So, and we get reports and all from them, or just whatever they need us to look at. So we were convened by the Independent Tenant Organisation supporting communities, and we probably couldn't do any of the work without them. So they do all our admin and look after us very well. So it started in 2017, and I can't believe it is as long as that now when you're talking about it. And we always do our action plans, and we just biannual reports. So we do it on the work. So we're used a lot for different consultation responses. And we've been involved in so many, like the changes all there, and the allocation of houses and intermediate rate rents and all the rest. Shaping training, sometimes we're the guinea pig to put training, towards, see what we think about training. So we were involved in the tenant participation training for the housing association. So they brought it to us first, and it was very helpful then to put a few maybe amendments on it. We've done a lot of good practice visits. I love going, because I've been involved in the housing association for like 25 years. I love going to housing associations just to hear their tenant participation strategies, and they are very impressive when you go, and it's lovely to see it. And plus then I'm the tenant advocate as well. So key achievements. See, our first meeting was in September 2017. We've had 43 meetings since. We have been involved in 11 consultations, responses, 2 research contributions, 6 good practice visits. We really need to try and get out of them. COVID really stopped them, because we would have tried to have each of our meetings at a different housing association or whatever. COVID put an end to that, so thank goodness for Zoom. Don't know what we would have done without it. The Department of Communities Key Performance Report, we have our manifesto. I think Jens maybe were sent that. And I'm the tenant advocate, and then we have a vice chair as well as the chair of the Housing Policy Panel. So as I say, we act, we're used a lot by different departments, like Chartered Entities of Housing, or if there's an issue needs to be needed somebody as a sounding board, people will come to us. So recent consultations from 2000 then, vulnerable review of allocations. It's funny putting that down for 2020, isn't it, when we're still involved in that now in 2025, but I know it's coming to the end. The housing supply strategy, the intermediate rent, like you all know these, review the regulatory framework actually for the housing associations. So we were involved in sort of what should be seen, what should be sort of marked on, what levels they need to achieve, and actually what customers need to see, how the housing associations are performing. So we were involved in that. And recently then, of course, the risk under attack, threat of violence. So about domestic abuse, we've been involved in that. So, and all about the selection scheme, we know that the intimidation points have been removed. So we've been really, really looking into that. I suppose everybody's been really looking into that in Northern Ireland. So, and of course then we give a very, very hefty response to the draft programme for government. Because I think everybody welcomed it so much, and everybody was really intrigued by it, and that was a long day for you, Siobhan. So it was. Of course, then we were involved there in a consultation of the draft fuel poverty strategy. As we all know, the cost of living's bad for everybody. So good practice and training. So we presented at the Renters' Voice training session. So that we have an ongoing collaboration with them on the private rented sector issues. Their voices aren't always heard, like the social houses, the social ones. So it's nice to have them involved sometimes. And then we were the test at the first run of the new OCN. So that was the participation training for housing associations. And that was done through Supporting Communities and Housing Rights. So my role as tenant advocate is to represent and support the interests of all tenants, and to be the voice of tenants at a strategic level, so that we are involved in all those changes of procedures and policies, and to oversee the monitor and implementation of, hopefully, the new tenant participation strategy, because it hasn't been looked at since 2020. So I think we're really in need of that. It's still working. We know it's still working, and everybody's taking it on board. But it'd be nice. Everything needs to be reviewed. So it is really 5 years out of date. So we're really, really pushing for that, and we bring it up at every meeting to the Department of Communities. I'm sure they're fed up of hearing it. So I think you've got a copy of our manifesto. So quite simple. We really want everybody to have good quality, affordable, sustainable homes. And also homes are appropriate for their needs, so that disabled people, can get their adaptations and stuff done. And also be located within a thriving and inclusive community. We also support the practice of the tenant engagement and empowerment, which stresses that tenants should have opportunities to be involved, develop, monitor, assess and report on the quality of the housing service the landlord provided. And also we heard earlier on about co-design. We want to be involved in the co-design of a lot of the new policies and things that are reviewed. And we urge the government initiative to bring homelessness to an end. Government must provide suitable and affordable homes in rural and urban areas. It's funny when I say urban, because I'm always pushing the rural element. But so for both areas, we support the Department of Communities in developing the housing supply strategy. Emphasising building safe, affordable and inclusive communities over the next 15 years. We're really, again, we're pushing this all the time, an updated tenant participation strategy. So it just would increase the standard for the tenant engagement and opportunities for community involvement across all the social landlords. So our key asks, of course, we want to finish what we started with the participation strategy to get it looked at. Build more. We want to see more social housing to meet the needs of the people in rural and urban areas. We know that the lists are long for people looking for houses. And raise the standard for the tenant participation for all tenants, and link up with their counterparts maybe in the Republic of Ireland. We actually were invited to speak at an All Ireland tenant participation conference recently, and it was lovely to hear from them too. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And that's really useful run through. Actually, it's a really good approach, I have to say, and could derive huge benefit, and clearly is deriving huge benefit. So I'll just pick up on the issue of the strategy being 5 years out of date, and you've made your point clearly that needs, and I think I would agree with you, that needs updated as soon as possible. At this point in time, what initiatives would you like to see in the new strategy that weren't in the old one?
Well, we would need to work together and do lots of consultation with the tenants, with the housing associations. We need to see what worked in the last strategy. We need to see what didn't work. I was involved recently with doing the consultation for the community involvement strategy within Housing Executive. So you need to get out on the ground. It's not what we think, it's what the people who are involved think. So you need to have the tenants, you need everybody involved. Again, co-designing, and that's what it's all about. So definitely see what's worked, and we still believe that this whole strategy is working, but it just needs to be moved maybe to a different level.
Yep. We did actually do a pre-consultation in 2020, shortly after lockdown, of course, but we did it over Zoom, myself and one of the Department for Communities representatives, and I think we met with 200 or 300 different tenants across the board, from Housing Executive and Housing Associations. So we have that sitting, but then again, that's nearly out of date as well. So, but the department has that. But again, it's all about consultation and co-production and
co-design.
Co-design.
Yeah. And I think we have reiterated we're very keen on that approach as well. In relation to homelessness, and I know in the Housing Manifesto, like yourself, I have a particular interest coming from a rural constituency in rural homelessness, but also homelessness across the board. What initiatives do you think should be brought forward to address homelessness, given it's an increasing problem and an increasing concern?
I think Bill, do you want to come on? But I think homelessness, we've always had homelessness, and in the rural areas we've hidden homelessness, and that's one of our biggest problems. And even when, say, now it's changed from latent demand to, the advanced housing tests that are done out, and Housing Executive do out in areas that maybe MLAs or councillors have brought forward that they think there's a need for housing in that area. A lot of people aren't coming out to those, and we need people to come out. You have to have the evidence that you need houses built before it's took on, So we need to try and push it. And the communities now get involved sometimes in them advanced needs tests to try and get people to come out. And we also like co-ownership there and different variations, that you can show people that there's other options, maybe just rather than social housing. And I think that there's an issue too, even with temporary. We haven't enough temporary locations for people to stay in. Like sometimes they say you have to go to Belfast because in the rural area there's no temporary houses, there's no hostels, there's no stuff for people to go into. So I think we have an issue there too that could be we've looked at. We have very, very little temporary accommodation. Bobby, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, there are a lot of difficulties for housing associations at the moment. One is procurement. The procurement rules and guidance have all been changed. There's a fear from the senior management teams that it's just leaving everybody open to litigation, whereby contractors who maybe don't get a contract or have an issue with it, they can actually hold the housing associations more or less to ransom through fear of litigation. The other one is the housing association grant. It hasn't been determined as yet. Whether or not then, given the shortages of skills, tradesmen, and the higher costs of materials, whether or not it would be economically viable for a housing association to build until the grant has been determined. The other issue is utilities, where in your own constituency, Mr. Kingston, it's the highest incidence of social housing and social deprivation in Europe, let alone United Kingdom or Ireland. And what's stopping people from housing associations from building there is the lack of water and sewage. And we do understand the difficulties there, but the water authorities seem to be reluctant to go in and to invest in small areas rather than talk about the 20-30 billion that's going to be needed over the next. For 1 or 2 billion, or $1 million, you could actually go into small areas like North Belfast, improve the water and sewage there, and allow housing to be built. That hasn't happened. As well as the 50,000 people who are homeless, there's always more people than just the one applicant for homelessness. There are 28,000 homes in stress. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And I think the difficulties there, I think NIFA and the Housing Policy Panel can maybe explain more detail those difficulties, but it's something that I think should be brought to your attention.
A lot of that in the programme of government that we responded to was like the need probably for departments to come together to try and sort out. I actually was involved, I'm a chair of a rural residents forum for Northern Ireland, and I was involved in the last maybe 6 years in doing a research paper on why there's a lack of housing in the rural areas. And honest to goodness, it came up nearly every single time that there wasn't enough infrastructure or water sewage. And that just came up steady all the time about the lack of investment in that. So
okay, thank
sorry,
you.
Just add on to that. The Housing Policy Panel is here to assist. If the community or if the different organisations want to come to us, and use. I don't mean it in a bad way, but use us as that sounding board. Because these guys are at that strategic level and want to get talking to all you guys as well. So please keep that in mind too.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to go to members. We're going to have to zip through things pretty quickly if we can, please. So I'm going first of all to Morris, then Kelly, then Brian.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I find the work that you do very, very interesting and very valuable, and congratulate you on that. If you were to have an updated tenant participation strategy, how do you think that it could be better ensure that all social housing tenants, regardless of where they live, can have a voice? How can you gender what you do into a more of a focal point that people can, as you
that's
said,
what we're all about. That's exactly what we're all about.
Yeah.
And everyone, we read out all the different housing associations there. Every single one of them have a tenant participation strategy, and the majority of them have member tenants on the board. Now the housing executive don't. We have a central housing forum which acts like it's almost like a sounding board for the board. But like the majority of these ones, the housing associations have tenants on the board, which is massive. Absolutely massive. And anybody that's involved in the structures of the tenant participation, the majority of them come from a community group. So they're getting all the views from those people to bring them to the board. So it's not just that one individual on their own agenda. So with reviewing this here, maybe we could up that even more, maybe, more participation from tenants. It's something we need to just look at.
Yeah, and I suppose, sorry, Bobby. So we had to set up then a training arm, supporting community, had to set up the training arm to enable us to work with the housing associations as the independent tenant organisation. And I would be the one that would work then with the different, we have 17 out of the 20 registered housing associations would be members of ours. So we would very much work closely with the different housing associations and actually the approved housing bodies now in the Republic to make sure that there's something suitable for every single tenant that each housing association has. May it be that they fill out a survey once a year, they sit on the board, like Bobby sits on the board with Radius, and it's ensuring that every single barrier that they can knock down is knocked down, and that there's so many different opportunities to get involved.
It's like a menu of choice. It's like a menu of choice for participation. Some people only want to hear information. Some people want to get involved majorly in it. Some people just, want to be used. They're maybe only interested in certain parts. So it's all about giving tenants a choice of what they want to hear.
We have many tenant panel meetings, and they're very well attended. And we have people working full time in tenant participation. And we were very fortunate this year. We were awarded the gold standard from supporting communities. So it just shows you that Radius, and I know many of the other housing associations, do take tenant involvement very seriously, and at all levels, of the organisation.
That's very important to have that. But then with the housing executive, then we have all different tiers of the housing community network. So we've got an area one, we've got a regional one, then we've got the central. And the central, then we sit with the board members and with the directors. But I think we've about 14 working groups. So if there's an issue comes up, like we had an issue with adaptations for the disabled people, so we set up a working group, and you should have seen the leaflets put for information for people. Like it had to be the 1960s, so we've revamped all the leaflets, made it more user friendly. So there's tenants at every stage of that process. So we've got digital inclusion working group, we've got welfare reform. Whatever there's an issue, there's a working group, and it's all tenants that's involved in that and community people. So I think we're doing well. Hopefully bringing the voice to the table.
Just one quick one.
Just before you say, it's a great example of dynamic co-production and co-design. I have to say it's really good in that sense. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. But you talked there about tenant participation. How do you think that you can use tenant participation to shift attitudes towards social housing, to make it more desirable to live in a social housing setting, especially in big estates and schemes, still in foster community relations, pride, and community that we all thrive on in the rural setting?
And I think, sorry, Bob. No, I think so very much. The more and more engagement that the staff are doing with their tenants, and the more and more promotion, like I say to them all the time, any small wee thing at all, you shout about it because you'll get more people involved in that. So they do a lot of promotion around their tenant engagement, and it is bringing more and more people in. And I suppose, it's community development and tenant participation are so different, but they work so well together. So it's getting the people involved first, and then getting them that they want their voice heard, that they want to get or have better services delivered for all tenants, not just for themselves.
And I remember Neitha were doing a piece of work getting the stigma of the word social, and when there was new developments coming, people say not in my backyard. So I think Neitha has done a lot of work on that to try and get that stigma away from the word social.
Accessible, maybe a better
accessible,
word,
affordable. There's that many different words, but
and it is becoming the housing of choice. There's no doubt about it, because gradually that stigma is going, but it's not an easy one.
Thanks, Chair. Congratulations, and I wish you well.
Thank you.
Get your project finished.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Start a new one.
Ellie, Lana, Isla.
I'll be quick. So, tenant participation strategy, obviously we're waiting on that. Has the department came to you at any stage to talk about their plans for that?
Well, as Patricia said earlier, we would meet at least five times a year as the policy panel, and at every meeting the person would be questioned. So I think the most recent bit is that they're hoping to get resources from somewhere, pull back on other things, and maybe by the end of this calendar year there may be a start made on like a pre-consultation again. So that's.
I think there's so much work involved in it. So if they're going to allocate people to do that work, it's a major job.
But I'm just wondering, we know that the housing executive have a panel. Renters' Voice obviously don't represent everyone in the private rented sector, but have they indicated that it would be a tenant participation strategy for all tenures?
No. It would just be for housing associations. Okay. Because the housing executive of theirs. Sorry,
I'm worried about that because there are a lot of similarities. There are differences, but there are similarities, and I have a fear that some are left behind. Yeah.
Well, housing executive sorted with their community involvement strategy. So, we just renewed it there, and it's fabulous. You can hear the community voice and the tenant voice right through it, and we made sure of that. And it was the community people and us reps that went out and done the consultation.
But it's just the fact that housing executive tenants are seen different. Social housing tenants are seen different from private renters.
It's the private renters we worry about, it's a hard one to.
The Ombudsman can currently deal with housing executive issues. Have you talked to the Ombudsman about her thoughts? Because she's got an investigation starting on the state of housing executive houses. But if that remit was expanded to cover all tenancies, would that be something you could welcome?
Absolutely, we'll welcome anything to improve housing across the board in whatever tenure. And I suppose we are very, very aware that all the different tenures have the same issues. Do you know? But how do you get a private landlord with two houses to write a tenant participation strategy? Do you know that way? So, we've spoken about it before, and
we always push that registration of private landlords, but that's a hard thing too, to get them registered. At least if they're registered, you know where they're at, and you know who they're at. But the private ones, and even the price of rent, in the private sector. Like, my goodness, there's no ceiling on that at all.
Well, the price of
It's
rent for
ridiculous.
you guys in the social housing sector is not small either. So we know that there are controls on that. But I was just thinking, when you called out the list of people who are represented on the panel, it wasn't all of the housing associations.
No, we do try to get a representative from all, but I suppose even for some of the housing associations that maybe are a wee bit later to the game, you know, we don't want just to get a tenant for the sake of it. It's definitely not a tick box exercise. But we want that person from the housing association to, in a way, go up the ladder and get all of their, you know, get a bit of training, know a bit more about it, know a bit more even about, like Bobby mentioned earlier, the housing association grant. You know, we want people to have the ability to come and really have that true tenant
We need
voice.
meaningful. We need meaningful participation.
There are a few difficulties there, and you know, the housing executive, you know, are seen. They're a statutory organisation, so they can't appoint to the board. It's a public appointment, for instance, there, but they do work very closely, and they have the initial responsibility for homelessness and the allocation of points to homelessness. There are difficulties in that some of the other agencies, such as the police, for instance, they will recognise the statutory entitlements to share information with the housing executive over allocations, whereas housing associations aren't. They're seen as a charity and don't have that cooperation. And it's a matter of making sure that there's suitable people put into the right accommodation. For instance, you could have someone who is maybe early onset dementia, someone else is just recovering from a stroke, and then a person's put in there with social behavioural difficulties, and that house is allocated, property is allocated to them without the housing association knowing whether or not they'll be suitable, and the devastating effects that will have on other vulnerable people already housed there. Yeah. That's something that I think.
The final question is just about, look, I know what you do, and I've talked to a few years before, but and you have a lot of consultations that you're doing. Are you involved in the review of the primary social needs consultation coming out of the housing executive after the removal of the intimidation points?
We were. That was, remember, Fiona came again.
Fiona, yes.
This girl, I tell you, we've had a relationship with this girl doing this consultation for 5 years now. So, and she actually came to us then when the word came out about the intimidation, very quickly, about the intimidation points being reviewed. Plus, we actually have a working group then within the housing executive too, looking at that. So since the allocation, so it's been major work, and that's been major work for those ones that have been doing that work. They must live and breathe it. We've been doing it for 5 years, and so yes, we were able to come there. But
yeah, we're very fortunate to have good relationships with the likes of the Fundamental Review team. I won't say the whole thing. You know,
FRA.
the regulator, you know, the department, the whole thing. So we get involved. Listen, if somebody comes to us and says, will you give us something on this?
No,
we'll usually do it, you know, that way.
Okay.
So,
I was just going to say, Chair, it would do no harm if you are respond to a consultation, if you want to share anything that you're happy to share, of course, with ourselves, just so we know what your voice is on that. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, will do.
Because even if it's in our packs, we've got it to read. Yeah.
Yes.
No, thank you very much for all the work you do, and I know a lot of it's done voluntarily, so thank you very much.
Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming in today. I'll try not to talk too long, but just to say very supportive of the work over the years, under the various names, NITAP and State Actions Project. I remember Brian Holmes. And
back in the day.
So many years involvement with the different iterations of the group. Very important work, and in any community where we're working as elected representatives, it makes all the difference if you have a tenant association, a residents association to work with, and people who will just provide that nucleus of people and a positivity which rubs off on other people, you know, about wanting to improve the area for everyone's benefit. So really important work that you're doing. And in the modern era, particularly community cohesion, I think has become more important. And Northern Ireland is becoming more diverse, more ethnically diverse. And the work, I think that's the new challenge for us all, about promoting community cohesion, you know, but listening to people's concerns, but understanding how society, you know, moves forward. Very very briefly, Bobby, you mentioned about water infrastructure. So, I mean, the Finance Minister did announce this week, I think it was 100 million for social housing, but 102 million or something for water infrastructure. And certainly, like you, I'm constantly highlighting those small developments that can't proceed because of huge amounts of extra costs for water infrastructure.
I think there's a large amount also for co-ownership, but I don't think that the actual amount of the HAG has been determined yet and has been given to the housing associations. You know, I was talking to one of the CEOs and some of the senior leadership teams on Tuesday at a conference, and that was a concern, but the water is a big concern. And there are areas such as North Belfast and other areas.
Well, thank you for speaking up for North Belfast.
But it's not, and I don't live in your constituency anymore.
Well, you used to, but
no, I used to
changed the boundaries, unfortunately.
But there's the same problem with infrastructure, and I do know that in the North Antrim, a company was going to build a factory there. There wasn't the infrastructure there, and I think it was electricity on that occasion, and it moved to Wexford. So we're going to bring the economy up and promote growth. The infrastructure must be addressed because it's affecting the livelihoods, the affordability of people to be able to pay or to build.
No, and I think it is getting more attention. I want to get on to my question before I'm cut
Very
short.
briefly, Brian,
The question I would ask is, it's relevant, Bobby, to where you live. I mean, you live in an area that was redeveloped in Mid-Shankill, but on the other side of Tennant Street there, you have an area of older housing. I think you're with Radius. They own about 40 or 50 properties of older properties, which they inherited from the old Tennant Street and District Housing Association. So my concern is the housing sector used to do those sort of redevelopments of areas where the older housing stock, 100 plus years, you know. But there you have, unfortunately, there's a housing association with a substantial number of properties which they say, because of the condition, they're damp, they're not viable for them. And I'm constantly harping on about derelict properties, but particularly where you just get properties, and as much as I will complain about it, they will say they're just their condition is beyond. Are you finding that is an issue in areas about older housing stock that is in poor condition?
You try and bring them up to acceptable standards, you know, for insulation, and to make sure that these homes are appropriate for people. It cannot be done, Brian. And the houses, some of them
have to bite the bullet and say it needs to be redeveloped.
Yes, yes, that would be the case. But some of them are single brick.
Yes.
And it would cost more to actually repair them than to actually build a new house. You know, to bring them up to acceptable living standards, because everybody's entitled to an affordable, warm, comfortable home. And it's just unfortunate that those houses are there. And
the housing sector have been doing a bit of work. They've been retrofitting some of the houses to make them, you know, easier, more sustainable and more cost effective for living. So, and we welcome the fact then hopefully they're allowed to build again. And that would be amazing. They got to, but there's an awful lot of work to be done. And I was very remiss because when I talked about the community involvement, it's actually now the community involvement and cohesion strategy. So we've made sure cohesion's in there, and plus, so that's definitely, because we know we're very diverse, we country now, and plus there's an awful lot of work been done on race relations. There's actually funding and all out from Housing Executive as well, and there's a race relations officer now doing a lot of work. He was involved in a myth sort of busting leaflet there, you know, the way like people have a lot of views on people, new ones coming in from different countries, so it's to try and to dilute that a bit and to help with a lot of tensions that are in Ireland at the minute.
Can I just add on to Patricia very, very, very quickly? You know, I suppose with diversity, it's new to us all. Even in, as I said earlier, I work with the approved housing bodies in the Republic as well, and we actually have an All-Ireland Tenant Engagement Conference coming up now in October on International Tenants Day, purposely. And one of the things that we're getting experts from some from the mainland, some from down south as well, to come along and tell us how to get people with different diversities, how to get them involved in tenant participation. That word as well.
Listen, and please advise us in detail that. Would we certainly be interested, or members may be interested in attending that.
We do.
I think that'll be useful. Listen, we could talk for a lot longer on these issues. I have to say, we've only skimmed the surface, but it stands out to me that you're a fantastic resource for lots of different people, and that's a model that I think is really, really valuable. I thank you for the work you're doing. I would have loved to have longer to talk about it, and maybe we'll get an opportunity again. But for now, we'll pick up on a number of issues coming out of the session that we think could be followed up on. But appreciate your time today.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. So, members, I wonder, could we maybe...
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, I wonder if members agree that we write to infrastructure in relation to some of the issues raised there. I was thinking particularly that issue around doing small works where they can be done, rather than allowing huge projects to kind of... that obviously can't proceed without funding, but that they're maybe more focused, smaller pieces. That's something that I have thought previously could be done. So are members content we glean those issues and write to infrastructure to flag it?
Sorry, is that about the water infrastructure?
Yeah, about the water, about where smaller schemes could be done to allow smaller blocks and groups.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd agree, because that's, sorry Kelly, is I putting on in front of you there?
No, go on ahead. No.
Some of the schemes that we need done down in my constituency are small, and you get the bog standard reply, subject to finance availability.
The only thing I would warn about this is that the water people did tell us that they don't prioritise housing. So what small works that they may want to do may have nothing to do with housing. You know, it could be the upgrading of a wastewater treatment works in Corridor, but we don't need more housing in Corridor.
Yeah. But I think we can emphasise housing. We can continue to represent our interest in housing and our request that they facilitate as much housing as they possibly can.
Right. But in the Finance Minister's statement the other day, because I noted it, he said 100 million for social housing, and associated with this, I think it was 102 million for wastewater infrastructure. So he was connecting it in. So I think we should be seeking more information on that. You know, and how they will. And I was making the point, I hope this will be, you know, across all areas too.
We should maybe seek also, because national investment into what goes under the ground is always very welcome. No cranes without drains, but the people, the social housing that these guys are involved with are being expected to do the developer contributions. So it means then the number of homes that they can build is reduced because they have to put under the ground things. So it might be worthwhile to ask the Minister, given the issues that there are, and he's reaching out to, because he did say he's reaching out to infrastructure to find out what's going on, but the amount of money that's given to the housing association to build social homes, if they're having to take quite a large percentage out for the under the ground stuff, does that mean that will harm his targets that he wants to achieve? Or is he having to up his offers to the social housing, you know, the grants, to ensure that that's covered? Because I had asked a question and it was very unclear.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking that's out to consultation? I mean, there is no developer contribution as such currently, but it's out to, there's a consultation ongoing?
But there's no consideration of when you're publicly funding the build, then it's sort of like one department saying, maybe we'll do it this way, and another department's going to be paying for it. You know, it's just moving money around as opposed to actually making change. But it might be worthwhile. It's just to ask the Minister, given the constraints on his budget and the funding for the housing associations, has consideration being made to the developer contributions and the impact it will have on the number of his targets for his builds?
Yep. Members content with that? Sean?
Can I, yeah, it was just to say, Chair, whether does that mean then that he would have to increase the HAG that goes to the housing associations, Kelly? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think.
Or if that was possible to try and offset any developer contributions that would, I suppose, impinge on the number of houses that he wants to build.
The impression I got from an answer I had was that it wouldn't be increased, and they would have to find the money out of the existing budgets, which means that the number of houses could potentially be reduced. Yeah.
Okay, Claire, are you content with the detail?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, members, anything else? No? Okay, thank you. So moving on then to forward work programme, please, at item 8, copy of which is page 249. Do members have any comments or content to note the forward work programme? Content to note, thank you.
Can I just check, Chair, sorry, on the the meeting on the 1st of May with National Lottery TPC. Is that going to be Alwyn, do we know, or is it going to be National Lottery recipients of funding?
It's
the National Lottery itself.
It's the National Lottery itself.
So be Alwyn.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Members are otherwise content then with that. Any other business today, members? No, thank you. So agenda item, date, time, location, next meeting. Just before I outline that, just to flag up members, there is one of the engagement sessions taking place this afternoon if anyone is able to attend that. And to,
Apologies, Justice.
okay, and to outline the fact that we'll be in the Senate chamber at our next meeting. So the next meeting is on 10 a.m. on Thursday, 1st of May 2025 in the Senate chamber.
Chair, can I just double check tonight's session? Where is it at? 115?
Getting the nod there, yes.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
115. Okay, so listen, just before we pack up, just to wish each and every one of you a very happy Easter. I hope everybody gets a bit of a break. I also want to thank the committee staff here and the clerking staff who have done a tremendous job and kept us right at every step of the way. So I hope all of you as well get a nice break over Easter, and I hope the weather continues to shine on us. Okay, thank you, members, and see you again after Easter.
Happy Easter.
Thank you, Sharon. And could you take us out of broadcasting, please?
Committee Room 29, Sound.